Imperial High Command, Classified Addendum. Fleet Distribution, Priority Seal. Origin, Tribunal Case File 9 AURUM, Ridgeline Ceth-Sorra. Note: the following narrative reconstruction is drawn from tribunal testimony, field surgeon logs, engagement reconstruction records, and long-range observation reports. It is distributed without redaction by order of Imperial High Command. It concerns High Commander Geth-Var Ossian, 1st Imperial Vanguard, and what 9 humans did to him at Ceth-Sorra. The artillery platform arrived at the 48th hour, right on schedule, and Ossian did not use it. He stood at the edge of his advance command post with 4,300 soldiers behind him, and looked at the ridge called Ceth-Sorra in the gray light of a coalition morning. The ridge was quiet. It had been quiet before, in the intervals between contacts, and he had learned during those 72 hours not to confuse quiet with empty. The humans were still up there, 8 of them now, with one resting in a covered depression 60 meters back from the forward line, and they were waiting. Ossian was a methodical man, 22 years of service, 6 campaign decorations, 4 other engagements in this same offensive, none of which had cost him more than 36 hours of pause. He was not given to sentiment and not given to doubt, and standing at that command post with an artillery platform in orbit and 4,300 soldiers at his back, he found that he was not going to advance. He stood there and did his arithmetic instead. It had begun at 3:30 on the 4th day of the Sorra offensive, when the lead column encountered the human position. The plan had been a standard corridor push. 3 columns massed fire, the ridge taken within the hour. Intelligence had assessed the rearguard as negligible, a covering force, standard doctrine holding position, while the main coalition body completed its withdrawal. Ossian had run this calculation 100 times across 22 years. He had a number for everything. He did not have a number for what happened at the 11-minute mark. 41 dead, 38 wounded, in 11 minutes from 9 fixed positions on a ridgeline, against a lead column of trained Imperial soldiers who had seen combat and did not rattle easily. 9 humans. 89 casualties. The math sat in the report like something that had been written in the wrong language, and Ossian read it 3 times before he accepted that it said what it said. Sergeant Prime Orvath had transmitted a contact report at the 8-minute mark. His voice in the archived recording was the voice of a man trying to describe something that did not fit the categories he had been given. Heavy contact, at least a reinforced company. They are everywhere, they are not stopping, requesting immediate. The transmission ended there. Orvath was dead at the 9-minute mark. 14 years of service. One of the finest line officers Ossian had ever commanded. What Orvath had not known, and what Ossian would spend the next 72 hours coming to understand, was that there was no reinforced company. There were 9 humans on a ridge who had decided they were not moving until they were ready to move, and who had treated the distinction between 9 shooters and 90 as a bureaucratic irrelevance. The second column reached the draw at the 18-minute mark. By then, Ossian had the casualty numbers, and he was already doing the arithmetic differently than he had done it at dawn. Of the 89 casualties in the first 11 minutes, 84 had been direct hits. 5 were terrain injuries, falls, secondary strikes. From 9 shooters across 11 minutes, 84 aimed rounds had found a person. The field surgeon's log was unambiguous on this point. Every round that struck Imperial soldiers that morning had been placed deliberately. Ossian called a halt to the advance at the 40-minute mark, not a retreat. He was precise about that distinction when he recounted it, and he was precise about it at the time. He needed to understand what he was dealing with. He sent a reconnaissance element along the eastern flank, 4 scouts, experienced, 3 of them veterans of the Myrdon campaign. Their mission was to identify the human positions and assess the enemy's supply state. None of the 4 returned. 2 bodies were recovered at the armistice. The other two were never found. Ossian ordered a second halt. He requested an artillery platform from orbital support. 48 hours, he was told. He ordered his companies to hold position and wait. He did not tell them what he was thinking, which was that he was no longer sure an artillery platform would be enough, and that not being sure of that, after less than an hour of contact, was itself a thing he needed to examine carefully before he did anything else. At the 48-hour mark, 4 surviving company commanders delivered their assessments. The assessments did not agree. Commander Varath believed the ridge had been resupplied. He had counted muzzle positions at intervals and concluded the human complement had grown to at least 30. His methodology was sound. His conclusion was wrong. The same 9 humans had occupied 41 separate firing positions over the course of his observation window. They moved constantly, laterally, vertically, between covered positions, in patterns his scouts watched for and could not predict. Commander Yallows believed there were explosive emplacements he had not yet triggered. He had lost 11 soldiers to 2 separate detonations in the approach draw, and he was correct. 3 in-place charges were confirmed there later. What he could not explain was that the charges had been placed after the engagement began, during the hours when his scouts were watching the ridge. The humans had moved through Imperial operational perimeter in darkness, without detection, and had planted them while being observed. Ossian consulted his field engineers on whether this was possible. They told him it was not, under normal conditions. Commander Seathrek had nothing to add. He was conducting a field burial for 22 of his personnel when Ossian reached him, and he said only that he wanted the ridge glassed from orbit so he could advance through the ash. Ossian understood the position. He did not approve it, because by that point he was no longer certain orbital bombardment would resolve the situation. He noted in his own private accounting that this uncertainty was itself a data point worth recording. Commander Ovar was the most useful. She had positioned herself on the high ground to the south and spent 36 hours watching the ridge with long-range optics, logging everything she saw at measured intervals. At the 60-hour mark, she observed one of the 9 humans being carried from a forward position by 2 others. The carried individual was visibly injured, severity unclear at that range. The 2 who moved him placed him in a covered depression 60 meters back from the line. One then returned to the forward position. The other stayed with the injured man. Ovar's initial assessment: 1 combatant out of action, effective defense reduced to 8 or 7, since 1 was now occupied with care of the injured. Ossian corrected her. 1 human injured withdrawn, with a companion attending him. In standard military logic, in any species military logic he had encountered, this represented a reduction in combat power and a distraction of resources. The math was simple. Ossian had run versions of it 1,000 times across 22 years of command. The human who remained with the injured man was not idle. She was treating him, keeping him alive, keeping him present in the accounting. And the human who returned to the firing line did not perform worse for knowing her companion was alive and attended to behind her. She performed the same. Commander Ovar's positional logs told the same story across every interval she recorded, same accuracy, same position discipline, same unpredictable lateral movement. No degradation, no distraction. 8 fighters. They fought as though all 9 were still at the line. Ossian stood with Ovar's report in his hands and thought about that for a long time. The artillery platform arrived. Ossian did not give the order to fire. At the 47th hour, Corporal Danya Reyes walked down the ridge. Commander Ovar's long-range optics had tracked her for most of the previous 2 days. She was the one who had returned to the firing line after placing the injured man in the covered depression. She appeared young. Ovar estimated 21 standard years based on coalition physiological profiles, and she had been on that forward line for 51 of the 72 hours. 2 visible injuries to her left arm, confirmed by Ovar's records, a slight favoring of the right side when she walked. She came down under a flag of parley, white marker, the human convention, recognized under armistice protocols. She covered the distance to within 30 meters of Ossian's advance command post without hesitating. 17 weapons tracked her approach. She appeared not to notice or to consider it a relevant variable. She spoke through a field translator, and her voice was level. She sounded, by every account Ossian later gathered from the soldiers present, like someone describing a schedule rather than issuing a threat. "We are taking our injured to the extraction point now. We will be off the ridge in 8 hours. If you advance before we are clear, we will make 72 hours look like a morning stroll." Then she turned and walked back up the ridge. Ossian stood at the edge of the command post and watched her go. He thought about the arithmetic. 219 of his personnel across 72 hours against 9 humans, of whom 1 was injured and none were dead. He thought about Orvath's transmission, the panic in a voice that had never panicked in 14 years of service. He thought about the 4 scouts who went along the eastern flank and did not come back. He thought about Commander Varath counting 30 positions and finding only 9 people. The same 9 people, moving like water across a ridgeline, impossible to fix, impossible to model, impossible to exhaust. He thought about Corporal Ray's walking to within 30 meters of 17 weapons, carrying 2 injuries on her left arm and a third in the way she favored her right side, to deliver what was not a threat so much as a statement of operational fact. He thought about the question he had been asking himself since the 40-minute mark. What am I dealing with? And he thought that he had his answer now, and the answer did not fit into any column he had been trained to fill. He gave no order to advance. He gave no order to fire. His companies held position. His 4,300 soldiers held position. The artillery platform held its orbit overhead, unused. 8 hours later, the ridge was empty. The coalition extraction completed without incident. When Ossian's forces advanced, they found the prepared positions, the firing lanes, the covered depressions where the 9 had rested in rotation across 3 days. They found the approach draw where the charges had been planted in darkness during active observation. They found 41 separate firing positions across the ridge face, each connected to the others by covered movement routes that his scouts had watched for and failed to see. 9 people had built all of it. 9 people had held all of it, and they had walked off the ridge when they were ready, under their own terms, carrying their injured man with them. At the tribunal 3 weeks later, Tribune Adjutant Vorval Shan asked the direct question. Had Ossian declined to advance because he was afraid? Ossian was quiet for a moment before he answered. He had faced 4 other engagements in this offensive. He had not paused at any of them. 6 campaign decorations, 22 years without a blemish. By every metric the Imperial Vanguard used to measure such things, he was not a man who stopped. At Ceth-Sorra, he had stopped. He had stopped because the cost-benefit analysis, conducted rationally in the manner he had applied it for 22 years, had produced a clear result. 8 people with demonstrated capacity and demonstrated will to fight indefinitely were describing a fact when they said they would fight for 8 more hours. The cost of those 8 hours was not a cost that could be justified against an objective the coalition had already vacated. That was what he told the tribunal. That was the honest account. The fuller account, the one that sat behind the arithmetic and informed every calculation he made after the ridge went quiet, was simpler and harder to put in any field report. He had watched thousands of soldiers under pressure across 22 years, many species, many campaigns. He had seen soldiers fight hard. He had seen soldiers fight well. He had never once seen soldiers fight as though the concept of stopping simply did not exist, not as rhetoric, not as inspiration, but as operational fact, as a condition of their reality on that ridge. Corporal Danya Reyes had been awake for 60 hours when she walked down to deliver her message. 2 injuries to her left arm, a slight list in her walk. She gave her terms and she walked back up the ridge, and she was ready to do it again if he made her. He believed her, not because it was logical, because everything that had happened on that ridge for 72 hours told him she was describing a fact rather than making a claim. The tribunal did not pursue the charges. The addendum Ossian had requested was drafted within 14 days and distributed fleet-wide to every Imperial field commander. It was 61 words long. It began, "Do not mistake a human rearguard for a rearguard.